Hello, educators. Welcome to the Writers Workshop. And if you're returning, welcome back. My name is Dr. Sarah Donovan, and I'm an English language arts teacher of over 20 years and a teacher educator. And I'm here to share resources and experiences that have transformed writing for me and for my students over the years. This is all free, and all that I ask is that if you use these or share them with other people, that you report back and let us know how it is going for you. This tutorial is a three-part series on personal narrative. I'll take you through how to begin with your students, how to model your own personal narrative in front of your students, and how to help students draft. There are other videos that help with revision or teaching grammar or how to grade them that apply to all the different genres and modes of writing. So I hope that you check them out. So let's get started with personal narrative. Welcome to the Personal Narrative Workshop, Part 1. So first, I just want to remind you that there's 8 other videos that offer some ways of getting started with your writer's workshop in your in your middle school all the way through high school classes. So I hope that you take a look at those and they will help you with the different phases of the writing process. So I'm also going to do this video series on different modes and genres. So mode is just a quick reminder, narrative, argument, informational, and sometimes those overlap a little bit. And the genre is sort of the style or the form that takes in the world. So the short story is a narrative mode, and it's going to be looking like prose probably, but a short story could also be a graphic novel or a comic. The personal narrative, same thing. It often comes in prose, but it could be a verse novel. It could also be a graphic memoir of sorts too. Then we have informational essays that can take the form of several different text structures. So compare and contrast, or how-to essays or problem solutions. And then it can also look in a lot of different ways, like a video or a TikTok or something like that. The descriptive paragraph is a really short, really concentrated, beautiful piece of writing that is, well, descriptive. And then we'll have quite a few options when we come to the poetry tutorial. So I hope that you check those out. So here's a quick overview of one of the ways that you can set up your personal narrative unit if you want all of your students to be writing a personal narrative at the same time, which is sometimes good. But ideally, you'd want your students to be writing things when they're ready to write them. But if you do this whole class, you could probably do this in about 2 to 3 weeks. I like to think about doing writing units in between sort of larger reading units, because when we're talking about a personal narrative, we can borrow ideas from fiction that we're reading, but it also is something that doesn't need to be text dependent. Students can draw on their own lives and be the experts of the content in these. So if you want to get started on a personal narrative, I think 2 to 3 weeks would be good. And here's just kind of an overview. If you start with introducing the mode or the genre, and then look at mentor text, which we're going to do first. Then you spend a couple days looking at mentor text, and the teacher models an example of how to use the mentor text to do their own drafting. Students select a topic and begin drafting, always kind of circling back to looking at mentor text, to talking to the teacher, to talking to peers. It's a very lively first few days as students are trying to figure out what they want to write about and what's worth spending time on. Same with Thursday, trying another topic if needed. Sometimes once you get drafting, you realize, oh no, I don't really care about this, or this is too hard, I want to write about something else. Or if you hear someone else in the class is writing about something, you may say, oh, that seems interesting to me. I have a story that I'd like to tell. And then Fridays are an open mic. And if you check out that video on open mic speaking and listening, it's a great way to start trying out ideas. The next week is when you start your mini lessons that are related to this particular mode and genre. So mini lessons such as leads, how to get started, and the mentor text would help you do that. Mini lesson on dialogue, how to punctuate, but also how to show characters' facial expressions and things like that. Maybe a mini lesson on closing, what's special or unique about ending a personal narrative. And all along, the students are drafting and the teacher is checking. So you might have a checklist where once you see a student's lead, you check it off. Once you see the student's dialogue, you check it off. So working through the writing process. And then the second week you do a peer conference, and there's a video about that, and using a checklist. And then finally, when we're ready, or as ready as we can be, we have a publication party and everyone publishes their personal narrative, and you have a day of reading everybody's stories, which is really the most wonderful part. So this is pretty quick. So the personal narratives would probably be fairly short, 500 to 1,000 words, and you could probably do it in 2 weeks. So I'm going to take you through a few of those steps. So the very first step is gathering mentor texts. How does this genre live in the world? So you need to look for personal narratives, memoirs, and bring those in. And here's a tip. Your librarian would love to help you. Either your librarian in your school, or if you don't have one, your local librarian in your community, or contact your local university and talk to that librarian. You could probably get, a dozen, 20 different memoirs, bringing them into class to have them filling up your classroom as everyone's doing this kind of writing. So here's an example of a mentor text, a portrait of the scientist as a young woman by Lindy Elkins Tanton. So one of the ways that I might approach this is to talk about the book, but then project or show the way that the writer gets into the story, which is some features about memoir or about personal narrative. So if you take a look at this, I would kind of read it out loud and ask the students what they notice. The clearest image in my mind is the clump of young poplars at the foot of my parents' driveway, an unpruned, unthinned clump that concealed a deep opening to the culvert that ran under the end of the drive. Their young spring leaves glittered and clattered in the sun and wind that afternoon as I walked up the road. So students might notice that there's maybe some technical terms in here that they might not know that are from the particular place of this writer, though you might have some students who do know these words depending on where they live. You also might notice like very vivid words like glittered and clattered, sun and wind, afternoon. We have a sense of time and place. It's very sensory, but it's also focusing on the setting. So one of the ways we can get into our own personal narratives is to begin with setting, which is very great. And then, very great. And then the next paragraph, it was 1982, and the physicist and Nobel Prize winner, Professor Hans Bethe, have visited my school, Ithaca High. So in the moment, and then a little background, right? Then they tell us the time of the date, the time of year. We have a sense of the time of year in the first paragraph, but it backs up and then says, okay, this is the year and this is what I'm talking about. So you could have your students take us right into a moment, maybe the first time that they learned how to play soccer. Take us right into that moment. It was raining, it was cloudy, or it was sunny and beautiful. And then the next paragraph, it was whatever year. So you use this as a mentor text or a model. The Glass Castle is quite popular in most high school settings. So this might be a book that you have that you can have your students look at. So looking at the beginning of this, how this author gets into her story. I was sitting in a taxi, wondering if I had overdressed for the evening, when I looked out the window and saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. It was just after dark. A blustery March wind whipped the steam coming out of the manholes, and people hurried along the sidewalks with their collars turned up. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading. Okay, so right into the scene again. So the author's taking us directly into the scene. There's some inner thought about wondering. There's also we learned something about another character, right? So there's the mom. We get a sense of the time of year, a blustery March wind. And then we have lots of vivid language, whipped the steam coming out of the manhole. We could draw that image, right? So there's a lot happening in just this paragraph, but both mentor texts are establishing setting, are establishing a little bit about who they are, where they are, what time of year it is, and then another person, another character, even though these are real stories. And then here's one more, All Dogs Go to Kevin. This one starts a little bit interesting. Hello, Lobby, I said, addressing the box on the corner seat. I peered into the holes looking for a response. The lobster's claws were rubber banded together, so there was none save the soft scritch, scritch, scritch of its legs on the cardboard. How are you today? So this is a moment we are using dialogue with a lobster. And there's kind of an interesting moment here, right? There's some scritch, scritch, scritch. So that's onomatopoeia. There's some quotes for dialogue. There's also, we can get a sense of the setting because there's lobster claws a little bit. Also something about the character. The writer, right? Who's kind of funny. And it's all in first person. So all three are first person. So pulling on the mentor text, you get a sense that these are different ways to get started in the story, but also how important the setting and the place is to the writer. The other thing that's really helpful is to circle back to the mentor text a little bit later when you're on a new part, such as the ending. And I'll tell you from experience, the ending is the hardest part. It really is. Students spend so much time getting started in their story that they kind of have like 3/4 as the beginning, and then they rush to the end because they run out of time. And then the end, they're like, and that was the ending, and I really liked it. So the endings are really tough. And so looking at mentor text will help us see the way that this can live in the world and kind of interesting ways that we can have conclusions. So this doesn't sound like an essay. The personal narrative is a story. You can see this. It's very vivid. There's dialogue, there's humor. It's a first person. So we want the ending to have that kind of feel too. We don't want the ending to feel like an essay because that's very different. So here we see the ending. I can't believe you were scared of that dog, his friend said as we walked away. She's like 10 pounds and cute. He leaned in toward me, opening his mouth for one last insult, then thought better of it and skated away. Taffy may have been a horrible little dog as far as the rest of the world was concerned, but she was perfect for me. So there's some dialogue at the end, obviously a character interaction. We learned something about this horrible little dog, but the thing is that the dog was special for the writer. And that's kind of the aha moment or the so what of this story, is recognizing the special relationship between the author and the dog, even though no one else in the world actually got how special that dog was. And it didn't really matter. So you can see that there's kind of it's a universal theme in a way. It's something that we can kind of take away and think about the things in our life that are important to us, but maybe not others. And it's kind of funny, but it's not like so overt, like, let me tell you what this is really about. It's just sort of a quick commentary at the very end. So one of the things that's important when you're selecting mentor texts is that the texts and the authors that you're choosing represent the community that you're in. And so most of the time when I was teaching, I had Latinx students who were from many different countries. Some were from Cuba and Mexico and Colombia and Guatemala. And so this is a great mentor text to use that's sort of situated in Cuba, which is not necessarily what the story is about, but it's important for students to see different authors that represent them. So here's the ending of this essay or this chapter, this personal narrative in My Broken Language. It's a memoir. When I got out of the pickup, I walked to the edge of the woods and stared. Introduce yourself. Go talk to the trees, Mom said. I ventured in, ferns feathering my shins, and didn't stop walking till I couldn't see the house, and the house couldn't see me. Jack and the pulpits were terrariums of rainwater and drowned flies. Mushrooms shriveled and swelled. A baby toad peed a puddle in my hand. In that moist wilderness, mine and mine alone, I recited a poem aloud, an original from memory about the Chuck Taylors that my dreams were made of. The trees listened close, gave a standing ovation. Their mossy velvet roots invited me to sit and felt so soft, I almost forgot Titi Jeannie's Lazy Boy. Okay, so this is a little concluding paragraph of her chapter in her memoir. So you might ask students what they notice about this and see what they'll probably pick up. Some sentences are long, some sentences are short. We see there's the mom and other characters kind of in this scene as well. But also it's important to note that this isn't about saying facts of things that happen. And maybe all these things didn't actually happen, or maybe the baby toad maybe didn't pee a puddle in her hand. Maybe it did, I don't know. But in memoir or personal narrative, we can add some flourishes here and there. We can remember this in a different way. Maybe her memory of this is that the wilderness was very alive and that it was talking to her and that she did feel it kind of coming around her and that they were her audience for her poem. And maybe in the moment it wasn't, but in her memory it is. And so that's one of the really great things about thinking about personal narrative. It allows us to revisit our memory in our past and re-remember it now that we're a little bit older. Okay, so inductively, we've sort of figured out what a personal narrative is. It's a first-person story. It's nonfiction. There's filling in of the memory. It focuses on a specific aspect of the writer's life. There's some new understanding in rewriting it and revisiting it. There's dialogue, character, setting. There's a clever ending of recognition. And most often, readers can relate to what's going on. So instead of telling students what a personal narrative is, let the mentor text do the work and let them inductively figure it out so that they feel like they're coming to understand what it might mean for them.